All right, so we're ready to go. We have Sabrina Shaheen Cronin, an attorney, to speak about what happens if Roe v. Wade is overturned and the legal ramifications here, how it impacts our state and abortion rights for women. So we're going to get started. Sabrina, thanks for doing this with us
Of
and
course.
sharing your insight.
Thank you so much for having
Hear
me,
me
Taryn.
okay?
I can. Yes.
Good. All right. Well, let's get right to it. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, we know we are one of 17 states that will revert back to the 1931 law, for us at least, where it bans abortions and makes it illegal. What does that mean from there for women who may have an unplanned pregnancy? It's against the law.
Well, in Michigan, we would be reverting back to the 1931 law, and that's a statute that basically says that it's a felony for anyone to have an abortion or anyone to help someone have an abortion. And that would make it a felony for doctors and citizens alike. And I know the governor right now just filed a lawsuit against the county prosecutors and to try to get those prosecutors to not prosecute people for those crimes.
As an attorney, though, I'm curious. So, this is going to be interesting if this does in fact happen, because now it's going to tax our police departments, correct? If it's a felony, you'll have to go out and be called to potential areas where this is happening and placing doctors or females under arrest for this. And then they will actually need to hire attorneys.
Well, there are a lot of people that have said already that they're not going to prosecute. You know, we have Dana Nussel who came forward and said she's not going to prosecute those people that may aid and abet or, actually carry out the crime themselves. So, a lot of times counties and states will then catch up to the law and legislation will have to be passed. And that's what was essentially this opinion that was leaked. And that's what it said, that they want to leave this law in the hands of the state. Many states do allow for abortions, many states do not. So I have a feeling a lot of these people wanting abortions will go out of state to get some abortions in the interim while Michigan is still trying to figure out what it needs to do.
I just think it's fascinating because I don't think a lot of people have thought about this. A felony, what would the charge actually be at that point? What sort of consequences could people face? And doctors, would it be different than the women seeking the abortion? What do you know at this point? What could potentially happen?
Well, if the statute is MCL 750.14, which makes it a felony for anyone administering with the intent to abort a fetus. And the Roe versus Wade case indicated that we had the viability, the moments of someone's pregnancy. And it was Roe versus Wade that determined the trimesters, that if someone was trying to get an abortion post viability, then that would be a crime. Now in Michigan, they're basically saying that it's a crime regardless. And 750.15 is making it a misdemeanor that if anyone gives someone a drug to induce an abortion, then that would then be a misdemeanor. And like I said, the governor has now tried to, well, she has filed a lawsuit basically wanting to sort this out and saying that this statute needs to be repealed.
But what about this actual 1931 law? Does it go to if a woman is raped or incest and something like that, that it's still outlawed?
In Michigan, yes. In Michigan, it does not allow for those exceptions. Some states do, some states don't. And in fact, Michigan is one of 11 states that have actually banned the insurances right now, even while Roe versus Wade is still in effect. Michigan has been one of 11 states that have not allowed for abortion coverage in private plans. So, you'll see across the country more and more companies, large companies, that are allowing for reimbursement opportunities or healthcare coverage for abortions. And the argument could be made that some employers here in Michigan could allow for that as well. Now, whether someone would be prosecuted for quote unquote aiding and abetting someone to, but I highly doubt that someone would be going out of state to get that person. And actually, ERISA is a federal protection that could preempt the state law. So let's just say you do have an employee who goes out of state to get an abortion because whether their employer covered it or because they want to pay out of pocket. ERISA can protect them. There's a big argument that can be made for that because that would preempt Michigan law that is yet to be overturned.
It is interesting. We've had a lot of people speak out right now as we're talking to us. Yeah, interesting. Anthony says if you can kill an intruder in your home, you can kill an intruder in your body. You didn't ask for that baby. I mean, it's just, um, it's sad, but it's no excuse. Go ahead.
The Michigan Constitution does not protect the rights to abortion. And that's kind of what the justices have been saying relative to the Roe versus Wade and then the Casey arguments that the abortion right was not a constitutional right. And so they're leaving it. And of course, this is not a finished decision. They still haven't. This was leaked, and the argument can be made that hopefully, or maybe they'll go back and think about it and revise what they were going to do. But the argument is that it wasn't a constitutional right, and therefore they say who knows that in each state legislation catches up with the times, and I believe that legislation will in fact come forward and become more progressive if it is given to the states to decide. And Michigan does need to look at its laws, and I do know that some of these things that are now getting scrutinized will be looked at and will be reconsidered.
And we've heard some experts before. It does seem like there could be some negotiation in terms of maybe not using federal dollars at all or changing the parameters of when or if an abortion could take place. So there's a lot to explore when it comes to that. But I want to go back just a touch because you've mentioned it when it comes to we've had many prosecutors say they won't prosecute. Dana Nessel, the attorney general, said she wouldn't either. Could they face any consequences or ramifications if they don't do what I guess their job requires them to do?
Well, if we're looking at Michigan, if this is definitely left in the hands of the state and those in charge, whether it's the governor or Ms. Nessel decides that no, they're not going to prosecute, well, then ultimately, they're making themselves above the law, so to speak. And who is going to prosecute them? I highly doubt there would be someone. There would be no other ramification at that point, especially since the federal government is saying it's not up to us, it's up to the states. So right now, the only thing that really is being looked at is whether these laws on the book, these antiquated laws from 1931, are violating our state constitution, the right to privacy, the equal protection of laws, and all of that.
What are your thoughts on that? When you look at it and take a closer look, how do you feel about that 1931 law?
Well, I think historically, Taryn, laws have always been very, very slow in terms of changing our way of life and how we conduct business and how we handle affairs, and look at the same-sex marriages, and we progress as a society much faster than the laws change. That's just historically speaking. So I think the laws would eventually change. And if let's just say, assume Roe v. Wade was never on the books from years ago, and it was always left in the hands of the state, I perhaps it's an idealistic version or view, but I believe that over time, the state's laws would have eventually caught up to the way we live our lives and the way we as a society want to have these rights and these fundamental privacy rights. There is some disparity in the law, obviously. We saw a lot of it with COVID and the vaccine mandates and things like that. So, there was a lot of that discussion with that, the right to privacy, my body, my choice, those arguments. But now we see it now with abortion. So, there's so many disparate laws on the books, but it takes something like this and people's progression and how we live our lives to definitely change legislation. Unfortunately, it's not really the other way around. It's usually how we live our lives, then legislation follows.
Well, obviously, there's going to be a lot of layers to this and some views on both sides. So it's going to probably take some time. But what won't is if Roe v. Wade is overturned, is it takes effect. The original 1931 law that takes effect immediately. Correct? There is no waiting period.
Right. Well, there are states that allow for, what we call, so Michigan, we basically had a zombie law that basically said the 1931 law was, of course, sort of stayed or zombied. It was dead once Roe v. Wade and the Casey law, the Planned Parenthood v. Casey law was in effect on the books. Some states rather, have what they call a trigger law, that whatever the federal court law decides it is, then that state automatically is triggered, and then that federal law is actually applied to that state. But the same is true that if the federal law is reversed, then the state's law would be as well. So yes, immediately it would be kind of some mayhem around, especially with healthcare coverage and employers covering abortions or, we've seen a lot of employers employ, having employees in other states. And so if they're in another state that doesn't allow for abortion, well, that's why that employer will give certain credits or certain, reimbursements for those medical resources. Or we see it with other things as well, other treatments. It doesn't necessarily have to be abortion, but we see it a lot with some larger employers.
Well, right. So this would, let's just be clear. I want to clarify, it would ban all abortions. So it doesn't matter if you pay for it privately or your insurance pays for it and there are no federal dollars going toward it whatsoever. It will still be illegal and considered a felony across the board unless the state law changes as well.
For Michigan, but that doesn't mean arguably an employer could reimburse or pay for that employee's abortion in another state where it is legal.
Oh, I see. And there are still states that progressed with time and they protected themselves just in case this day would happen.
Yes, yes. And, there are states that that basically, like I said, ERISA could protect our Michigan employer from allowing that abortion coverage. So even though they could be prosecuted for aiding and abetting, ERISA could stand in and preempt that that prosecution from ever going forward.
Sabrina, for those who don't know, what would the governor's lawsuit do? Of course, she's suing to be able to adjust or to update or fix or amend the state law. How long could this take in order for this to happen, and what I guess channels would it have to go through in order to be able to get this implemented or changed if voters feel like that?
So Taryn, she's essentially asking on behalf of the state of Michigan for an injunctive relief, which basically says that these counties cannot prosecute for people getting abortions or doctors giving abortions for now, while the antiquated law of 1931 is still on the books. So it's basically until the Supreme Court of Michigan looks at their decision from before saying that our Michigan Constitution does not allow for the right to an abortion. They're basically saying it's not a fundamental right. Um, she wants the Supreme Court to address that issue. And short of that, she's asking for basically an injunction staying the prosecution for any type of crime for abortions in the interim. So she filed a lawsuit against all of the counties prosecutors from prosecuting crimes of this nature. And we have 83 counties in Michigan, basically. So
Do you think it would be in the best interest to be able to? I know it takes petitions, 425 signatures on the petition to get it on the ballot, but do you think that that probably would be in our best interest for us in Michigan to be able to handle this as our own state?
that's a big question. I do believe that states' laws should have more control. Obviously, I
Taking your personal views out of it, let's just talk about legally speaking and when it comes to the laws. Yeah.
oh, when I read in its entirety the leaked opinion, and taking aside emotion, taking aside any kind of my own personal opinions of anything, it was a very well written, articulated argument. Of course, always these the people writing these are brilliant. Obviously they're in their position for a reason. That being said, there is such a thing as stare decisis, which is, you stand for the thing decided. And that means that laws are based upon the laws before it. So that's why case law and our history is so important, to know what laws come before it, what laws should then stand, what laws should be moving forward. Now, in this instance, what they're saying is that those decisions based on Roe v. Wade and the arguments of Casey, the other one that I had talked about before, Casey versus
Mhm.
these justices said that they in this leaked opinion, right? It's leaked. It's not final yet. There's no final decision, that they did not have a basis on which to grant that. Those decisions were not founded on, any kind of tenets of the Constitution of the United States at all. So they're saying they're not necessarily overturning Roe v. Wade. They're saying that these decisions are better left in the hands of the citizens of each state.
Right. I mean, people are talking about the life of a baby, and it's, of course, we're getting extreme views on both sides, but really it comes down to your constitutional right. That's what we're hearing, and not being handled at a federal level, but at a state level instead.
Exactly. Exactly. That's all it's saying. They're not opining relative to whether abortions should be done or should not be done. All they're opining about is whether it should be left in the states, in the voice of the citizens of each state. Because every state right now, as we see across the nation, has varying opinions and views. And we saw that throughout the last 2 years with COVID. So that's all it's saying. Nothing more and nothing less.
Yeah, it is interesting because we have dealt with that with COVID.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm just saying there's such emotion around it. People have not really read basically the fine print of the leaked opinion to understand that, because it is a very emotional topic, because it is someone's right to choose what they want to do for their body and for their life.
Right. And they're just going to their argument that they've known and not necessarily reading what was in that leaked document that may explore some other issues, which really comes down to your constitutional right. What do you foresee happening, Sabrina, or your thoughts on how this will progress? Um, do you think, and this is your opinion, do you think that it will likely be overturned, and that we will maybe, there's enough interest where the signatures will eventually get this on the ballot in November. Do you think that this will happen? What are your thoughts?
Taryn, I don't know. I know that had this not been leaked, this decision may have been released already because it was supposed to have been released in May, and now they're saying June. I think with all of the uproar, honestly, it's a travesty for the institution. Now they're protesting the justices' homes. Um, it's really for those reasons, I'm a little disturbed about how it's all been handled. Um, and maybe they're going to go back and revisit these issues, but this was a very strong decision. And the way that was worded, the way it seemed to come across was that it was very decided. That being said, perhaps, the court of public opinion may sway this decision. But I want our viewers now to not lose hope, because once, if this is decided, it will be left in the hands of the state. And the majority of the states right now do, consider abortions to be allowed until that viability stage, which is the second trimester. And again, Roe v. Wade is the one that established the trimester system. So we have, pre-viability, post-viability, and, a state may even then decide that, hey, a day after a baby is born, that's when an abortion still can be legal. So there could be an upside in that every state could determine its own laws and rules, obviously, when it comes to abortions and many other things to boot.
Yeah, and this is interesting because we don't know how this will really play out exactly. But for those who are watching us right now, we want them to know that you're speaking, Sabrina, mostly just about the legal impact on our rights and our state and what that means. I'm curious though, for attorneys, have attorneys in Michigan, have they spoken about this? How will it impact lawyers, cases, crime? Everything. It seems like it would exhaust maybe police agencies if it became illegal, and attorneys would be defending a lot more cases.
Well, again, Taryn, I think that I really think that's the emotional side of things talking. I don't think pragmatically, I really don't think that's going to happen pragmatically. It's like when we had issues with COVID and people were essential, employees were driving to work. They were afraid that they were going to get pulled over. Sometimes that happened, depending on the agency. You're right. Depending on that particular, law enforcement agency, yes, some people did get in trouble. Some people were fined. Some businesses were fined. Some were not. So I think it all depends on how it's going to shake out, whether Governor Whitmer's injunctive relief, the request for the injunctive relief, will happen, whether it will not. Maybe this will happen before the decision from our Supreme Court our federal Supreme Court will get rendered. A lot remains to be seen. I just want everyone to try to remain calm and not let too many emotions, even though this is a very emotional topic, not let too many emotions get, the better of them right now. We are merely, the messengers here. We're just trying to interpret the laws and just trying to convey what is currently being out there in.
Yeah, this is not about religion right now. This is about the law that we're talking about. Is there something, though, that we're missing, Sabrina, that people aren't realizing as we're talking about, because there is so much on both sides, emotion? It's so polarizing, really. Is there something that you're thinking that the general public is missing when it comes to this?
Well, Taryn, I think, like you said, we're talking about the law, but remember, the law is so, it can be very, very subjective. Now, it's not black and white. And I always used to say the world of civil law, the world of criminal, it sometimes it can be based on the arguments that you make and the cases that you use to support your argument. We have two sides of the fence right now. We have one side basically saying that our Michigan Constitution and the Constitution of the United States of America allows for the privacy right, the right to abortion, the right to do what you want, bodily integrity, equal protection of the laws, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have other people, the justices right now, the Supreme Court of the United States, saying, no, it's not a constitutional right. And we had the Court of Appeals of Michigan saying, no, it was not a constitutional right. So our own government sees such two polarizing sides of the same law. So it all comes down to the interpretation of the law, who's sitting on the bench at the time these laws are, basically ruled on. And that's why I believe the federal court wants to leave it in the hands of the state, the citizens, so that we can vote on what we want that law to be. The subjectivity of that law would then be in the hands of the state to then say, this is how I want the laws to be. This is how I want the laws to be perceived. This is the subjectivity that I want, and this is the state in which I want to live. And therefore, that's what I want to be ruled and voted on. Because remember, there's such polarizing sides of the same issue.
And this is, I'm just curious, who would be, if it is put in the state's hands and we do get this on the ballot, who would be in charge of writing that proposal or creating the law? I mean, how would that work? It goes on the ballot, then we approve it, and then it goes to lawmakers and works its way through the legislature?
Yes. Yeah. Just like any other law.
But at first would have to be voted on, or I guess voted against when it comes to the November election.
And that's going to be a hot topic for the elections, on both sides of the aisle. It will be definitely a hot topic. But I believe, because our laws are so subjective, and again, any argument can be made on either side. And, you heard the old saying, it depends on the lawyer fight, in a trial. If you have a great lawyer on one side and a not so good lawyer on the other side who's not prepared, a jury is swayed, just like the laws on the books. Whoever is deciding or ruling based on their own pre and subconscious beliefs and their, preconceived notion of what the Constitution stands for. We have Governor Whitmer saying, no, it's a constitutional right. And we have our own Michigan Court of Appeals saying, no, it's not a constitutional right. So, same with the federal Constitution. So, again, that's why.
What can we expect next?
Well, the next step, I think we're going to get an injunction, most likely granted, so that our citizens will not be prosecuted for these, this quote unquote.
Right.
Definition, that is what I believe is going to happen. And then I believe that even if this leaked opinion does become real and the justices do render their opinion, and it does, and I don't want to use the term I don't want to use the overturning. It's not necessarily overturning Roe v. Wade. It's turning it into the hands of the states. And basically, it's not overturning the decision. It's just, well, in a way, I guess it is, but it's just.
It is. It's overturning at a federal level and then puts it in the hands of the state.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that does make sense. All right, we got a couple of minutes. Anything else you'd like to add? Sabrina, you have a wonderful insight.
Well,
about the legal impact here.
I just thank you so much, Taryn. It's a very involved. There's so many layers to it. Like I said, with ERISA and some of the healthcare plans, and we have all the different counties and all the prosecutors, and then we have our own Dana Nessel saying she's not going to prosecute. There's so many layers and so many people's personal opinions and the people's belief that it is, when it's a fundamental right, your body, it should be your choice. And then we have so many other people that believe, with the viability and you're killing a human. So I want calmer heads to prevail. I believe that we need to really try to take your emotion out of it, as hard as that may be for some, and really look at just the objectivity of it. And I believe in time, our states will catch up to what we need to be, where we need to be. But in the short term, I think we will have some remedies, whether it's traveling out of state, whether it's trying to find, some reprieve somewhere else, whether it's with your own employer, with some reimbursement or credits for healthcare, getting the treatment that you want or need. And I do believe we will have some both short-term and long-term relief and finality to this issue that honestly really has been around for a while. And it's been very, very divisive and polarizing, like so many other issues in our country that I really would like to see on a more cohesive level. And the only way we really can do that is if we go state by state.
Yes. Well, Sabrina Shaheen Cronin of the
I want to thank you so much for sharing your insight, your knowledge with us on what could happen, what is happening, and why. And I'm sure this is not the last time we'll be speaking to you about this or other very important topics in our state. So once again, thank you for being with us here.
Thank you so much, Taryn.
All right. Take care.
You too.